Hi, my name is Michael James Ott, and I'm offering to serve our country as President of these United States starting in January of 2021. And of course, I'll have to be elected to do that. And you folks, I'm one of 340 million of us, and obviously an unknown at this point. So you need to get to know me better if you're going to cast a ballot in my favor. And so this particular video, I'm making a series of them, hopefully to allow people to get to know me better. This one particular one that I making today is called Tomorrow. And yeah, it's a fairly lengthy uh, presentation. And the good news is, and what I would say is, I would encourage you to actually watch the entire thing, but it's going to be a long presentation. And so if it's inconvenient for you to watch the entire thing in one sitting, then of course the brilliance of it is that you can quickly jump through it and skip to places that you haven't seen, or review some of the information, because of course you can see the slides and you'll know what I'm talking about at that point based on the slide that you're seeing on the screen. So here comes Tomorrow. Hi, my name is Michael James Ott, and I'm offering to serve as President of these United States starting in 2021. And I wanted to present, I've got 25 slides here to go through to talk about some very, very important things that I think are important for all of us going forward. So I have distilled this into, I think, 5 major pillars of things that are most important to us at the moment. And then there's many other issues that I think we can tackle step by step, depending on the participation of you. Okay, so you're going to hear me say this multiple times in my campaign. I have no personal agenda other than to do what the American people want for their government. How do they want to be governed? And I plan to try to do everything I can to execute on whatever it is that the people want. And the most important aspect of that is what the people want needs to be based on the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Now and if you're an American, if you watch television or look on the internet or interact with the rest of America in any way, shape, or form, you're seeing a tremendous amount of bias these days, depending on the media that you're looking at the moment. And it's very, very unfair what's happening, because no one is, really being fair about the truth on these issues. They're always deciding, well, I'm going to bias it my way. So they're only presenting a half-truth, a truth that only looks at one side of the coin. And I call this the coin paradox, because there's two sides to every coin, and you've heard this for years. Obviously, this is a saying that's been common in this country. There are two sides to every coin: pro and con, for and against, good and bad. It's true. Just like a coin has two sides. A coin is a coin. It exists, and the issues are two-sided. And anytime any media outlet presents just a one-sided view of a particular issue that looks at only one side of the coin, they're doing a tremendous, tremendous disservice to you and to me and to everyone else in this country. A tremendous disservice. And so I strongly, strongly, strongly urge everyone to get their information from multiple sources so that you can know and understand both sides of the coin. The second pillar is to actually redefine success. So we have really, our species for centuries and centuries has defined success as the accumulation of wealth, influence, and power. Wealth, influence, and power. And so it's driven emperors and kings and presidents to do all kinds of things, candidates for president to do all kinds of things, say all kinds of things, because we've defined success as the accumulation of wealth, influence, and power. And we've got to get rid of that, and we'll speak to that here in a few moments. But basically, our drive, our accumulation for it, and our allowance for other people to attain success as we've currently defined it, um, well, it's driving a lot of the bad performance and bad aspects of our society. And so if we were to replace um, that definition of success with a definition that's service-based, so service to the planet and the people on it, with the duration, measured by the duration or durability of that service and the quality or impact of that service, PDQ, then things would change markedly. It'd be a miraculous change for all of us. And it's a simple thing that you and I and everyone else, we can just decide. We're going to redefine success, not only in our own lives, but how we perceive it in the lives of others. The third issue or pillar is talk about climate change or global warming or however you want to put it. It's the impact of people on the earth, on our planet. And there's a raging debate about this, and I think I've got it resolved. So I'd like to talk about that in a moment. But I just want to point out a couple of things on that. About 200 years ago, there was roughly 1 billion people on the planet. And now it's rapidly approaching 8 billion people. So let's just say, just for the thought experiment here, that there are 7 times more people on the planet 200 years today than there were 200 years ago. Wow. And just to put that in perspective, wherever you live, you have an apartment, you have a home, you have a townhome, you have a mansion, wherever it is that you live, and you have the number of people that are in that home with you, in that dwelling. So 2, 3, 4, 7, whatever it is, and just imagine what would happen if overnight, effectively, the number of people was multiplied by 7. So if you had 4 people, you had a family of 4, and suddenly you had 28. Suddenly there's 28 people in your home. You can just imagine the impact on your life, the impact on your home. And this is what we've done to this planet. And I'll speak to other reasons why I think we can move beyond the argument about whether or not it's happening in a moment. But that's one of the things that I would like to speak to in my candidacy and as president. The fourth pillar is really to talk about nutrition and how it is that obesity is running rampant amongst our people, and actually we're having an effect. It's dispersing around the world, and this is actually a huge issue, and it basically comes to our system. The capitalist system is doing a great job of providing us the foods that we crave. And the negative of that, of course, is that foods that we crave, so full of salt and sugar and fat and other things that are bad for us, well, they're readily available. There's aisles and aisles full of them, and they're cheap and readily available and available everywhere, and easy to eat, easy to consume, and those really, the way that we're allowing this to happen to us, it's literally killing us. And then the fifth pillar is going back to this concept of representative government, of the people, by the people, then and only then for the people. Now, what's happened over the last years is that we've allowed government, you and I, the average citizen of this country, we've allowed the governance of ourselves to get away from us. It's been apathy on my part, on your part. We've let other people do this. We've stood back and said, yeah, go ahead and do this stuff. We're going to let it happen. And, that's okay. You can try to do that, but, you've heard it said many times, if you want something done right, you do it yourself. And the truth is, in a representative government, if you really want the government to be representative, you have to be involved. And we have to change the way that we elect people to office. I'm running my candidacy in a very, very, very different way. I'm not going through any of the political parties whatsoever. I'm basing it on the internet for the most part. Of course, I'll do many public appearances if my message gains any traction whatsoever. But the view is that what does it say about our country? What does it say if you have to be a billionaire or if you have to be famous from a reality television show, or you have to gather up $500 million or $1 billion and then run this series of attack ads on your opponents, which drives everyone insane? This is crazy. And in amongst all of this, we have made progress over the years. Okay, we're not like it was 200 or 300 years ago, where the availability of information is poor, and there's a lot of people that don't have the opportunity to be educated. We're a pretty darn educated society these days, and the internet basically affords us the opportunity to really communicate information very effectively and in a much better way. So I'm a strong advocate of election reform. So we're going to change the system so that it puts the candidates on an equal footing. And then I also think, especially for some of the more important offices or positions in our government, president being one, perhaps members of the Senate and Congress, hey, we're sophisticated enough that I think there should be a screening process, not necessarily to stop people from running for office, but at least to have them interviewed to make sure, or at least that we can then understand what people, how stable people are, and what is important to them. So we're going to go into more detail on some of these 5 pillars, and I see that we're about 12 minutes into the presentation. So you may want to stop at this point and pick this up again. But again, it's really, really important. I hope that eventually you'll take the time to go through the entire presentation. Okay, so let's talk about these 5 pillars in a little bit more depth. So going back to the whole truth. So the coin paradox, okay, a coin has 2 sides, and wherever you were born, whatever you do, whatever the people that you've lived with and the experiences that you've had, that all contributes to how you perceive a particular issue, okay? And what is good about it, and so on, and you've formulated a position. Well, you want this or you want that. Whatever it is. But the reality is that other people, having been born elsewhere and lived a different life and experienced different things, looked at that same particular issue and they see it in a different way. And that doesn't mean that there's 2 truths or multiple truths. It means that complexity, all of it, is part of the same complex issue. In other words, I don't care whether you're talking about gun ownership and Second Amendment rights, or abortion, or election reform, or tax reform, or on and on and on. You name the issue. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. We have different perspectives on it because our experiences were different, and they cause us to look at the same truth and come to different conclusions. And very much, by the way, the more similar our experiences were, the more likely we are to come to the same conclusion about the particular issue. And the whole point being that every single issue is complex. You cannot distill it onto a bumper sticker. It does not work. This is a complex society. But having said that, it doesn't mean that we can't understand the issues and their complexity. And it's not going to take years or decades or centuries. It takes hours, perhaps. But it's the fundamental thing of looking at the issues from these perspectives, pro and con, good and bad, for and against, and writing them down, distilling it in a clear, absolute picture. This is the issue, pro and con, good and bad, for and against. And then based on the amalgam of the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, you make the right decision. Okay? It's and you don't want to, not do it that way. If you make decisions out of ignorance, of some aspects of it, then you make bad decisions. You enact bad laws, and people suffer for it. So again, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Your media outlet, wherever you choose to watch on the internet or information that you get, you need to make sure that you're getting a full complement of the different perspectives of the issue. And if you're not doing yourself any service whatsoever, and you're harming yourself and your neighbors and friends tremendously. So get out there and find the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, pro and con, good and bad, for and against. And if you're looking at some source of information and they're not presenting the information in that way, in a very fair and fair-minded and both sides of the coin way, then you need to go elsewhere and find that other side of the coin. Okay, the next thing that I had addressed earlier is the redefining success. So again, our society, our species has defined success as the accumulation of wealth, influence, and power, and it drives all kinds of things. We spend our lives and our laws and our government trying to stop people from exceeding in success. In other words, they start impinging upon the success of others, if you will, the rights of others, the freedom of others. And so sometimes they do it well within, what we consider the norm or the law, but some people are so driven that they actually act in what we consider to be a criminal way, so outside the law. So, for example, Al Capone, back in the Prohibition days, he's like, hey, I'm going for it. No one can stop me. Wealth, influence, and power. Here we go. And there's plenty of other people that take that tact, and especially some people are so driven that they follow that path right up against the very limits of the law, or even exceed it. They try to do it in a skillful way so that we'll never know. They believe that they can hide the truth from us. But the reality is that eventually the truth comes to light. But so regarding success, we have to get rid of this definition of wealth, influence, and power, and embrace a new definition of success, where we talk about service to the planet and the people on it, and then we can quantify that in terms of the duration or durability of that service and the quality or impact of that service or to the planet. So you just imagine if people were driven, the type A individuals, the driven individuals on our planet, if we all were, redefine success, and just imagine what they would do on the behest of the planet and the people on it if they weren't laser beam focused on gaining additional wealth, but instead were laser beam focused on trying to help the planet and the people on it. It would be a sea change in everything that we do. So I also, the third pillar was the climate change issue. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about that and we've got this debate that rages, right? And it's really, honestly, folks, it comes to, there's a group of people, they're wealthy people, they have a lot of historical infrastructure. It's trillions of dollars that are embedded in the past, right? Embedded in coal and fossil fuels and that kind of structure. And because they have all that money in that, they are very strongly opposed to anyone saying that, oh, we need to move away from that kind of stuff. It's hurting the planet. And then on the other side, there are people that don't have the investment in that infrastructure, and they're looking at the 7 times or 8 times the number of people on the planet and saying, well, clearly we're having influence on this. I'd like to step back from all of that and just talk about the community pool here for a moment, because I think it's a great analogy for this issue. So there's a nice picture here of the community pool, and kids and adults are in there playing in the water, and it's a great time, right? And everyone enjoys it. It's lovely to be in that fresh, clear water and splashing around, and it's cool and refreshing and fun to do this stuff in the community pool. Well, what's the basic premise behind the pool? Well, we're in yes, it's a community pool, so we're diving in and jumping in the water. The premise is that the water is good, that the water is clean and healthy for us to be swimming in. And that fundamentally means that most of the people in this picture are not peeing in the pool, right? They're not peeing in the pool. We have to, and it's totally a personal thing, because the reality is that everyone you see in this picture, they could be peeing in the pool, and we'd never know it, right? But if they did, if all of them did, if they weren't honorable about participating in this environment, and they were peeing in the pool, then the pool water would rapidly go rancid, and it would spoil the pool water, and it would spoil the environment, and people would get sick every time they went to the pool, and on and on and on. And so the reality is that this beautiful thing, this wonderful, beautiful, refreshing thing that we have as the community pool, it depends on us. It depends on an honor system amongst us, the people in the pool, the people using the pool, the people in the community, to be truthful and honest and not pee in the pool, to use the other facilities to get rid of the urine and to be clean and respectful of this community. Well, the community pool is a great, perfect analog for the world, the earth itself. So we've got now, I've said a couple of times, 7 to 8 times the number of people are in the pool or on the planet than just 200 years ago. 7 to 8 times. You can imagine what this picture would look like if there were 7 to 8 times the number of people in this picture, in this pool. So we've got billions and billions and billions of more people on the planet, and all of us, whether we like it or not, we're peeing in the pool, and we're peeing in the pool in a way that we're not being very honorable about how we're treating this one lovely only place that we have as a home. This is our home, everyone's home. All 7 or 8 billion of us on the planet, we share the same home. And if people on another part of the planet are peeing in the pool, polluting in a much greater way than we are here, or we are more than other people are, it's all part of the same pool, and we're destroying this beautiful environment that is the only one that we have. And I had to, Stephen Hawking, he talked about, he's a famous scientist, he passed away, I think, here recently. But he talked about, his fears that mankind didn't have many years left on this planet. And then he said, well, maybe we can go to Mars. Well, I'm sorry, but can you? There's no way that we're going to go to Mars, and even if we did, if we don't change the way we behave, we're just going to go to Mars and spoil the environment there. We have to change our behavior. We have to change the way that we look at this fantastic planet that we have, this wonderful golden emerald orb in the center of the vast universe. So climate change, I don't care whether it's real or not. This home is our only home, our only home. And there's many, 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 many times more people here than there used to be. The implication is that we all have to be much more honorable about how we interact with this planet to keep it in a place where we can trust that it will be a good place for ourselves tomorrow and for our children and our children's children and our children's children's children for many, many centuries to come. Hitting upon the death by eating thing, this is obviously a big problem. We have a tremendous issue, not only in this country, but it's growing worldwide, and it really just comes to our system of capitalism has done a fantastic job giving us the food that we crave. And there's dozens, if not hundreds, of commercial organizations, businesses, and they have been tweaking their formulations for different foods to try to get them to be just exactly what people want, people crave, and then packaging them in the most affordable and readily available packaging to make it super easy for people to want something and then get it. And then because of the emphasis on how big this industry is and how they've perfected this over the years, the cost is extremely low. So you'll hear people mention that, eating fresh food like eating a pear or eating some salad with lettuce in it, it's much more expensive than eating a couple of cookies or something like that. Well, yeah, because they've specifically been working toward generating the foods that we want that will last, have very long shelf lives and packaging that's very easy to use and fulfilling our craving. We've got to totally look at our lives in a different way and work with the food industry to really kind of reverse this, not only for ourselves but for everyone around the planet. We got to realize that we're doing this to ourselves, and then step back and say, okay, we're not going to do this to ourselves anymore. So how do we use the same sort of infrastructures that the people are currently using to make potato chips and cookies and all kinds of other things, beef jerky and on? How do we use that same sort of infrastructure and change it so that now we're providing materials, foodstuffs that are better for people, so that the rate of obesity and so on goes down tremendously, and all the other health associated things are improved. And then finally, the last pillar is then and only then for the people. So the Constitution, the very beginning of the Constitution, the preamble, there's 15 words at the very beginning. You see some of them here in this picture. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. Now we can stop that right there and distill those 15 words down to 6. We, the people, perfect the union. We, the people, perfect the union. That in a nutshell, that in just a few words, is what government is all about. What the government and the governed should be working toward at all times. And it's the requirement. It's both a freedom and a responsibility. We, the people, perfect the union. So you'll hear people talk about America and make America great again and so on and so forth. America is not great because of economic or military might, nor is it great because of technological excellence or leadership. We are great because we are committed to fundamental ideas. And those ideals are freedom, equality, and fairness. And the Constitution, at its very root, the people in Philadelphia, whatever, 200 or 300 years ago, they sat and they argued for weeks on end over how to put together the framework, the beginning, an experiment, by the way, for governance by the people with those three tenets balanced between them: freedom, equality, fairness. It's what it's all about. And it's just that simple, and it's just that complex. So we have to be open to the whole truth, pro and con, for and against, good and bad, and we have to be fully engaged in the activities of our government. Now, if by some providence, I am elected, if you folks elect me to the office of president, every month, we're going to stay focused on one particular issue, and we're going to talk about that issue, good and bad, pro and con, for and against, and we're very quickly, within a handful of minutes or hours, we're going to build a framework around this is the truth around this, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And then the real question will be, what do we do about balancing the three ideals: freedom, equality, and fairness, given the structure, given the amalgam of the truth? What do we think is the appropriate balance of freedom, equality, and fairness? And we'll put together kind of a rough structure, and then we'll talk about, exceptions and problems that they might generate, and on and on and on. And then we'll spend some days looking at the existing laws and see how close they match up with what we think is an appropriate balance of freedom, equality, and fairness. And we'll tweak the laws or wholesale change the laws, but you've got to be involved. And I feel pretty confident. You brush your teeth. Most of us brush our teeth 2 or 3 times a day. If you add up the time that you do that, going to the bathroom and getting out the toothpaste and cleaning the toothbrush and all that kind of stuff, yeah, it's got to be something pretty solidly 4 hours a month. That if you add up the time, and I'm very sure, very, very, very sure that for 4 years, if the average person in this country will give 4 hours a month to their own governance, to participating in their own governance, to understanding and knowing and expressing their views, we will make tremendous, tremendous change. And in this way, and only in this way, will we wrest control of our elections and our governance away from special interest groups and wealthy individuals who don't care anything about the average American, and away from the people that also participate, the same sorts of people participate in our 2 political parties. We can wrest control away from all those folks. So those are the 5 pillars in some detail. Again, this is a long video. You're welcome to stop at this point, but I again would ask you, please come back. The next section talks about some other issues. I think we'll touch upon the 5 pillars just briefly again, but then there's other world issues that we will talk about, or I'll talk about here in the next minutes. But I want to take this time, there's a break in this presentation, because I want to say again, I, Michael James Ott, I do not have any agenda whatsoever. I am not a proponent of fossil fuel industries or solar power. I am not a proponent of gun ownership or gun control. I am not a proponent of different market strategies or regulation or deregulation, because, well, I have views on them, and the next part of this presentation is going to talk about some of those views. But the main thing that I want to emphasize is the number one thing that I will be doing in the office, again, for 4 years. I'm serving the American people. There's 340 million of us, 340 million strong, and I'm very happy to do whatever it is that those 340 million people want done for the future of this country, as long as, and the main stipulation is, you've got to participate, because there's no way I'm going to get it done alone. I'm one of 340 million people. There's no freaking way I'm going to get it done alone. There's going to be so much, opposition, and the headwinds against change can be mighty, and without all of us participating, without all of us passionately communicating what we think ought to be done, there's going to be people that stonewall and prevent progress from being made. So we're going to take the issues one by one. We're going to look at them, expose all sides of the coin, and then, armed with the whole truth, we're going to decide. Not me, you. All of us, 340 million strong, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to balance freedom, equality, and fairness, and we're going to do the dead level best that we can in implementing laws that make sense for us, and then periodically we're going to review the outcome and see how well those laws are working for us and change them. Things change. This idea that the Constitution or our laws are set in stone, those laws, those ideas are always put forth by people that are advantaged by keeping things the same. I spoke earlier about the oil and gas industry, all of the refineries and all of that infrastructure, the petrochemical infrastructure. These people have a tremendous amount of investment in the past in this structure, and for sure, like a wholesale immediate change or something probably makes no sense whatsoever. But nor does it probably make sense to kind of just keep going on the path that we're on. But again, let's sit down and talk about these things, each individual issue, one per month, pro and con, good and bad, for and against, and then decide. All right, but then and people I've spoken to, I've done kind of some informal discussion about, this concept, and people generally think that's a great idea, but they still want to know about my views today. So in full disclosure, I'm going to talk about some of these things, and I'm going to tell you how I perceive the coin on these issues. I'm going to talk about how I perceive the coin. But again, I cannot emphasize enough. I will always, if I am elected to the office, I will always look at pro and con, good and bad, for and against. I'll set that forward. I'll facilitate that discussion, and then I'll be talking to the people. The people in the audience, wherever I'm at, will be hopefully setting up ways to poll people and understand, what they're feeling and their concerns, and what they some ideas that they might have that are better than the ideas that we've come up with so far, and then, based on the amalgam of that, we'll distill it down to, okay, sounds like this is how we want to treat this issue. We want this thing to happen, and we want this thing to happen, and we want to safeguard against this other thing, and we want to protect that someone might abuse it in this way. And then we'll say, okay, if that's a good summary of everything that we want to do, then how do the current laws fit that? Okay. So again, a long presentation telling you about myself and these particular issues. And now I'm going to go ahead and over the next 15 slides or so, talk to you about my view of these coins. So the first one, of course, and we've hit upon this, is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I do have to say, I think it's factual. In fact, I personally believe that it's very much factual. I think most of you believe that it's factual, that we're not being served very well by the various information outlets that we have available to us, that they are biasing the information. And this is not just the news networks, it's different websites on the internet, it's radio stations and candidates, uh, all kinds of people, corporate leaders, all of these people, they have chosen to um, look at these issues, whatever the issues are, and rather than approach them holistically and present them fairly, as in both sides of the coin, pro and con, good and bad, for and against, they instead minimize or don't even acknowledge the other side of the coin. They just focus completely on their side of the coin, whatever it is that's in their best interests, and they try to drive that down our throats. And up until now, we've let them do that. And I personally believe, and one of the reasons why I'm running for office, uh, we've got to stop that. We've got to change our behavior as Americans, change our behavior as human beings, and step back, especially these major issues that we really care about. Step back and frame them in truth, pro and con, good and bad, for and against, all sides of the coin. And then once we understand in fairness and clarity the framework of the truth, then let's talk about freedom, equality, and fairness, and how we craft the laws to make this what we want it to be. So you're going to hear me talk multiple times about redefining success. This is one example. The abuse of Wall Street. We have these people that they're doing all kinds of things to fill their own pockets full of money, but we're allowing them to do this stuff. The thing about capitalism and money markets and so on is they can readily run amok. And if we don't keep certain regulations in place, then they'll run amok to a place where the economy will falter. We'll lose confidence. This is we had a shining example of this back in 2008. It's only 10 years ago, just 10 years ago, and the economic systems around the world nearly collapsed completely because of our failure, my failure, your failure, all of our failures in being apathetical toward these issues and allowing people who are just driven to make money to make all the money that they can and lie basically to other people about the quality of the investments that they were offering. In the end, of course, it is all driven by our current definition of success. The accumulation of wealth, influence, and power, and these people that are driven to be quote unquote successful, taking advantage of every law, of every loophole, of even going beyond the laws, or even going beyond places that we didn't know there was a need for a law because of their wanton drive for success. So we've got to change the way we view our lives and the definition of success. That's a huge thing. But there's other aspects like there's tremendous conflicts of interest. Corporate executives own millions of shares of their own companies, and they're driven to change the share price, to improve the share price. When they say we're going to do this for our stockholders, they're saying we're going to do this for us, the top 2 or 3 or 10 executives of the company, because they own so much of the stock. And it's, again, with the perverted definition of success that we have now, the real person, and we've allowed this, you and I've succumbed to this viewpoint also. Well, we're going to do this for our shareholders. We're going to do this for our shareholders. That we exist for our shareholders. No, no. Companies exist for their customers. They exist for their customers. And then secondly, they exist for their employees. The number 2 thing that they exist for is the employees. They exist for customers because they won't exist otherwise. Companies, they make, buy, sell. There's some kind of value that they bring to the marketplace, and customers come and give them money for whatever value they bring. But this whole idea of we exist for our shareholders and we're going to do these things for our shareholders, that is just the CEO and the president and vice presidents of the company saying, ha ha ha, we're going to trick you. Don't pay attention to the guy behind the curtain. We want to do this because it's in our best interest, because it's going to get the stock price up for us so we can make more money and we can be millionaires more times over. It's crazy. It's unfortunate. And unfortunately, I and you and the rest of us have allowed this to happen. And you can see this when the CEO of a company is making $100 million a year, and some of the poorest or lowest paid employees of that company are making, $5,000 a year. No, I'm sorry. There is not a person on the planet that's worth 1,000 times more than another person. That's just not true. And it's because of our definition of success, yours and mine, that we allow that to occur, by the way, because we hope someday, if it's not us, maybe it's our children would some future time be a CEO and make $100 million when their dad or mom or whatever only made $5,000 a year. But that's all part of the weakness of our current view on the definition of success. So I touched on this thing about climate change before, global warming, whatever it is that you want to, however you want to talk about it, label it, I guess is the better way to say this. And it's absolutely true that there are 7 to 8 times the number of people on the planet than there were just 200 years ago. The next slide, we're going to look at that graph. You're going to see what that says. And what it comes to is that if we're going to continue to live on this planet, our only home, by the way, going back to the community pool, you say, well, okay, maybe everyone's going to pee in this pool, and okay, that pool's no good anymore. I'll just go to a different pool. Okay, that'll be my resolution. I'll go to a different pool. People can pee in that one. I'll go swim in this other pool. Well, what if the other pools that you wanted to swim in were not just hours away, but days away, or in the case of a different planet that we can live on, years away? If you're not taking care of the pool, if you're not taking care of where you're living right now, there is practically no other place. We're taking our home, the only home that we have, a beautiful, splendid, unbelievable architecture of all beauty and light and wonder, and we're tearing it down piece by piece. Maybe another example is just imagine if you were just a family of 3 and you lived in a mansion that was 400,000 square feet and had 40,000 rooms. Well, you might say, oh, I'll just live in these rooms over here, and then it's okay if I go to the other end of the mansion and I tear out the walls because I need some wood to burn in the fireplace, or tear off the roof because I want to use those shingles for something else. And what you end up doing is you destroy part of the structure. And it's true that that structure will survive that for a while, but the more that you keep doing it, and the longer that destruction has been allowed to exist, the weaker that part of the house is, and the more likely that the infrastructure is going to fail sometime in the future. And the more that we've done that, and this is the thing, we're doing this at an alarming rate on this planet. We are spoiling and polluting this planet at an unbelievably alarming rate. The other thing I want to introduce right now is this concept of moral hazard. So, most of you probably don't know what that is. Maybe most of you do, but I want to, there's certainly some of you that don't. So I want to just touch on this. So a moral hazard is a problem that we have as humans, because if we don't experience it, then we kind of don't trust in it, or don't even perceive that it's a problem. Okay, so let's talk about the garbage collection that we have. It's a very efficient system, and it's not very expensive. Okay, so in my particular neighborhood, there's a contractor that's been hired by the city, and they come around once a week, and I have these bins on rollers, and I roll the bins out to the street, and they come and they have a truck, and boom, 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 and they take the stuff away. And this doesn't cost me very much. I think I want to say it's $20 a month or something like that for this service. And so it's literally out of sight, out of mind. And my family, we do a lot of recycling, but even that, you look at the amount of plastic and stuff that we generate, and even if it's being recycled effectively, wow, it's a lot of material. And then the garbage bags, the bags of garbage that we don't recycle. So just imagine. Here's the problem with the moral hazard. Let's say that the truck service wasn't there, that the contractor didn't come. Well, what would I have to do with my garbage? Well, I'd have to pile it up in my house, because there'd be no other place for it. So I'd have to take rooms in my house and dedicate them to stuffing bags of garbage in there. And what I would find is, over a very short period of time, I would have filled my house with garbage, which would take up the volume of living space, and also, wow, the odor and the potential health issues of having all this rotting material in the same living space with me. And so the reality is that we are, again, just using landfills. So we're taking all our garbage, and instead of stacking it up in our living rooms or bedrooms, we're stacking it up in the planet. And back when there was only 1 billion of us or 100 million of us, the planet was plenty big, could accept all that. Now if there's 7 or 8 billion of us, no way. No way. We've got to be way, way, way more conscientious, is a great word, conscientious about how we're dealing with all the stuff that we're generating. And we really need to recycle things in a big way. And there'll be people that say, well, that's terrible. It's going to cost this or cost that to really recycle things the way that we need to. Well, that's just additional jobs in industry. Yes, it'll be different. It will be different. But that's just because it's different doesn't make it bad. We have to fight some of this natural fear of the unknown or of making a change. The reality is we have to do this. There's too many of us on the planet, too much stuff that we're doing. We have to reevaluate how we're packaging food and other things, make all of that much more easier to recycle. And if the cost to us goes up, well, so be it. But that cost will directly flow into providing jobs for people to do things basically to save the planet from ourselves. Just to graphically show this thing with the world population, the population of us, of our species, is truly exploding. Look at this graph. Look at this graph. So thousands and thousands of years ago, there were, I don't know, some hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of people on the planet. And then back in 1800, there was plus or minus a few years, there was roughly a billion people. And today, there's 7.6 billion at least. It could be 7.7 billion. And we look at this and we just say, you can't, this trend cannot continue. This trend cannot continue, because if it does, you imagine, if you live in a major city and you walk down the street in that city and how crowded those streets are. Imagine 100 or 200 years ago, or from now, I should say, that there's 7 times the number of people on those streets. It's unbelievable, inconceivable. Same thing in your homes. Okay, if there's 3 of you in your home, 4 of you in your home, 5, 2, multiply times 7 or 8, and just what would it be like for you to live in your home with 7 or 8 times the people that you have? Going on to death by eating. So, and I'm not in any way, by the way, I'm not fat shaming or anything like that. Of course, everyone, depending on your perception, and some people are more sensitive about this than others. I'm not in any way claiming that people who are obese should be degraded or looked down upon, or not given equal employment opportunities, and on and on and on. In fact, if I were to be advocating that, then in the country as it is today, wow, I'd be advocating against half the population, or 2/3 of the population. We're a country sickened by our own cravings and our own ability of our industry to provide us what it is that we want. And it's because of the efficiency that we've put forth over the years, and really just all of us not doing anything about it, just being apathetic about, and maybe just ignorant about the real issues and what really is challenging us here. It's killing us, and we have to acknowledge that's true. That much like we need certain regulations in banking and certain regulations in Wall Street, we're going to need to do a self-assessment here of ourselves, and look at how capitalism is causing us to be obese, how our cravings and our willingness to pay money for these foodstuffs that are hurting us, how all that is coming together. Again, all sides of the coin, pro and con, good and bad, for and against. And then what do? What do we decide to do? Now, my personal view is that we'll very strongly look at changing the way that we eat, and talking, about how to make foodstuffs that are readily available and reasonable in price, but are much better for us. And that means we're going to crave them less, but people are still going to eat, right? We still have to eat. And maybe we can figure out, if we're really clever, maybe we can figure out ways to make these foodstuffs where we still really thoroughly, absolutely enjoy eating them, but they are low cost and they are appropriate, and they do not harm us as our current foodstuffs are. And so I wanted to speak also about election reform, and of course this thing about we the people. Again, just to reiterate that point, the beginning, the preamble of our Constitution, the first 15 words: we the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union. This is readily distilled to just 6 words. We the people perfect the union. Now, how unbelievably beautiful and eloquent is that? America, I will tell you this story. So, and I think it's in one of my videos, but I had the great fortune of living in Germany for a little over 2.5 years, almost 3 years, back at the turn of the century, so back 2000 and so on. And I was out and having dinner with a colleague, one of the plant managers of the company that we were working at when I was over there, and we had a nice dinner at a restaurant, and then dinner was over, and he was talking to me um, about well, how do you like where you're living, and how do you like our country, and so I told him how wonderful I thought Germany was, and they are great at maintaining their country and kind of keeping people like in living areas and maximizing the farmland and parkland and all that kind of stuff. And they're unbelievable about keeping things maintained and clean and so on, and very nice people too. I mean, it was great. And then he asked me about our country, and I said, well, we have good and bad, uh, 2 sides of the coin, and in fairness, the fact that we have a fair amount of racism still in our country, and we still struggle with healthcare issues, and this big disparity between the rich and the poor, and so on. These are the kinds of things we can do so much better at these kinds of things. And he leaned closer to me, and you could actually kind of see some tears welling in his eyes. And he said, you know, what my people did to the Jews, and you know what we did to the Poles and the Czechs and any number of other people back in World War II, just because we thought that they were inferior to us. You know what we did to these people. He said, do you know the United Nations? And I said, yes, of course, I know of the United Nations. And he said, this is in America for a reason. It's the only place it can be. It cannot be here in Germany. It cannot be in France. It cannot be in Canada. It cannot be in Mexico. It cannot be in China. It cannot be in Russia. It cannot be in South Africa. It cannot be anywhere but in America. Because in America, everyone knows, the world knows, that America is absolutely committed to this concept, to these ideals of the balance of freedom, equality, and fairness. So we've got, and honestly, I would hesitate to really say this normally, but I think it's really true that leadership on this planet, and especially in regard to freedom, equality, and fairness, has, for the most part, come from the United States of America. And I'm sure that that's biased some, by, I've lived here and so on. But yeah, I mean, it really feels like it's true. And as I talk to people who lived in other countries, who were born and raised in other countries, and now either live here or visit here, there's a fairly universal view that we are kind of this sanctum, this place of beauty, really, where freedom, equality, and fairness are number one priorities. And to be honest, I feel like we've gotten away from that. We're not holding those ideals as highly as we were some years ago. And the other part of it is with the elections and the candidates and so on. We've allowed, you and I'm in it, right? I've been apathetic myself. I've allowed people of wealth and desire for power. I've ceded the running of this country to them, and I've allowed them to change the rules, to change the regulations around election. And the other thing that we've done is we've left the basic election process, this arcane and archaic old old method. And there's good and bad to that, but wow, we should really, really step back as a people, as a nation, as a community, and say, can we not do this better? I don't know of anybody, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people over the years. Everyone is very upset by all these attack ads and the failure of most candidates to really present things in an unbiased and fair way, to try to move forward in some way that makes sense to uh, everybody, not just a very small number of constituents that gave huge money to their campaign to get them elected and so on. We've got to get the money out of our elections. I'll say that again. We've got to get the money out of our elections. We've got to wrest control from these special interests. And so I'm proposing that we would have this election reform in which the government would then host the secure website, and the various candidates for the different offices, not only federally but also in state and county offices and so on, they would all have their portion, their pages on this system, and the government would ensure and continuously monitor the security of those as well as the candidates. The candidates would be responsible for their page, for their content. They can, and again, level playing field. So there's regulations around what can and cannot be done on there, what can and cannot be included, how much money can and cannot be spent to do these kinds of things, on and on and on. And it's impossible for me to detail every possible aspect of this system, but we would get rid of a tremendous amount of all of the advertising on the popular radio waves, television and so on, and focus instead on here's the facts, and then there's this system, this website. People can see it, they can watch videos, they can read information. There can be people that are coming in and commenting on that, but these are people that are certified to be American citizens. So there'd be like a security system, so you couldn't just go on the system and make comments without being certified that you're at least an American. And then where you're from. So if you're from a news service or something, you're part of the LA Times or the Chicago Tribune or whatever it is. Well, then that would all be certified, and part of when someone read some of your comments about a candidate, they would know where and who that comment is coming from. And of course, the candidate then could respond in kind to those comments and refute them. And of course, the preponderance of this would all be what's the evidence of these comments? What data, what facts can you present that say that your comment is truthful? So there's other things going on in the world, and one of the big things, of course, is with 7 or 8 times the number of people that we had just 200 years. In just 200 years, it's almost inconceivable that we have almost 7 or 8 times the number of people that we had just 200 years ago on this planet. And hunger and being poor, it's a major driver of unrest and aggression, because people that are they're impoverished and hungry, they will listen to other people, again, seeking wealth, influence, and power. They will listen to leaders who will say, well, if you do this, positive things will come. We'll go fight a war. We'll take this. We'll murder these people. We'll get food. It's gone on for all of the history of humanity, and we really when we talk about addressing a terrorism, it's not firing missiles into these terrorist groups. I mean, that can be an ongoing part of it, but the better thing is to address what causes these people to be so angry and so bitter that they are willing to kill and maim other people. It's the fundamentals of what is causing them to do this that we have to address. And I would also offer that this is a great opportunity. I don't know what's going to happen with our food institutions, the capitalist companies that are making, potato chips and cookies and so on by the gazillions of tons. When we start talking about having to do things differently and finding out what is really a reasoned and reasonable diet for us to have, and converting that infrastructure into something else, well, one of the things that we could talk about converting some of that infrastructure into is how to provide these nutritional meals in a very reasonable way to people who cannot afford them, not just here in this country, but everywhere around the world. And here's a preliminary proposal. I have no idea whether this is appropriate or not. It feels like it's mostly in the right direction, but the key is to get to a place where we can give people, make sure they're getting food. And, part of this, of course, this would, it sounds like a handout, but it's not, because part of this would also be, working with the people, improving their education, helping them understand how to establish their own little markets and businesses and so on, and helping establish local food sources and on and on and on. So the next thing I want to talk about is Middle East peace. Now, the very first thing that I want to say is, because this is going to be highly controversial, my first statement on this that's on this slide. But after the horrific events of World War II, clearly the Jewish people were very unfairly singled out, and horrific crimes were committed against them. Atrocities on an unbelievable scale. And so the world at the time looked at what to do about that and said, well, we'll try to make up for this. We'll give these people a place. And, it's one of those things that there's as you make a law, or you look at what you want to do, and you actually try to do something, there's this thing called unintended consequences. And one of the unintended consequences of establishing the state of Israel is that there has been decades long, and still very, very strong today, hate and warfare and distrust. And it all stems from well-meaning people doing something for a group of people that had been unbelievably, egregiously harmed. In the intent was a great intent. It was a great intent. But the reality is that there have been and continue to be these unintended consequences. So, Einstein said, he's famous for saying that The very definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. And with the state of Israel, we've been doing the same thing for decades now, and there's still constant stress, uh, warfare. Um, it's a horrific situation, and I'm really hoping that everyone, not just the Jewish people, but the Palestinians and other peoples that live in this area, after decades and decades and decades of strife and fear and hate and loathing and mistrust, isn't it time to do something else? Haven't we arrived at a place where it's time to do something else? And so it occurs to me, and this is a proposal, there may be better ones. I would be totally open to anything from those peoples that are actually involved in this area to anyone else who has a great idea for how we might resolve these problems and the hate and the discontent and the fear and the maiming and the warfare. To me, it feels like there are certain areas around this world, it's not just in the Middle East, there are other areas as well, that are really, various religions consider them to be holy places, um, places that are really, really important to the believers of certain religions. And it occurred to me, and it occurs to me, that these areas, um, they shouldn't belong to anyone. We should allow certain areas around this world to be open and free, so that those that participate in the various religions are free to go without concern over violence or hate or uh, uh, bad deeds done against them. And so it would be great, and hopefully it's not naive to say that the United Nations, this community of nations, could come together and talk about these areas of the so-called holy lands around the world, and try to establish these safe haven zones in these areas. Uh, and in these safe haven zones, you cannot carry weapons. You cannot incite violence. You cannot uh, act in anger or vengeance against any other person. Uh, you come there with the intention and the purpose of respecting everyone that's in that region, and allowing them to live and to worship God in the way that they think is appropriate. And then in the case of the Middle East, the Jewish state of Israel, um, perhaps the state of Israel would need to disband or become something different or split into different regions or whatever. Um, but and again, emphasize to people that these areas, if they don't want to stay anymore, if they want to move on to some other place, we could subsidize the United Nations, the United States through the United Nations, other countries could subsidize transition into peaceful neighborhoods in other countries around the world. The next thing, actually, we've had some progress on this. We had some reform passed where we backed away from some of this three strikes and you're out kind of stuff, and because it just wasn't working. This idea that we're going to just pile on the punishment Um, this thing about drugs, we don't do enough. My personal view is we don't do anywhere near enough uh, public service announcements on this. We don't talk about it in the schools nearly enough. We don't talk about it in our families nearly enough. You have to stay away from drugs. There is you need to understand, if you live on this planet, that taking a temporary vacation, if you will, of ingesting drugs in some form and feeling better, that is not the solution. It is never the solution. It is not even a temporary solution, because it can lead to addiction. And then the negative is, of course, the drugs are sold illegally, and there's that whole structure of people that are chasing illegally now the ideals of our current definition of success. So they're out there, trying to get wealth, influence, and power, and they're running drugs and killing each other, and establishing regions of control, and of course fighting over those regions, and all the bloodshed and all this other stuff. And it's all bent on this unfortunate and inappropriate uh, use of drugs by people who have the freedom to use them, um, but really not. Okay, with freedom comes responsibility, and even trying drugs is an irresponsible thing to do. So our policies should be a tremendous amount of public service announcements, and uh, a tremendous, unbelievable emphasis on this at every level in our schools, every community. We should be talking about this continuously. Do not use drugs. Do not use drugs. Do not try to use drugs. And if you are, figure out why you even wanted to begin with, and stop. And spending a lot more money on rehabilitation over incarceration in our jails, um, and really reserving the most severe punishments for those people that absolutely refuse to sincerely participate in rehabilitation or retraining. And of course, legalize certain drugs. This is happening also. Marijuana is becoming more and more commonly legal in various parts of the country, and would not in any way encourage people to use marijuana, but there are certain things that pro and con, good and bad. Maybe our society just has to suffer the fact that this has to exist. But when it does, if it's a necessity thing that we just can't get people to not do certain things, then we legalize them, put them in a legal framework, and then tax them appropriately to pay for the impact on health and welfare in the public. Another area that really is important is tax reform. The tax code is unbelievably complex, and it is that way because, again, through apathy, myself and generations before me and people listening to this presentation, we've allowed it to occur. And it makes no sense. The tax code, we should never have begun or gone down the path of, well, we'll put this special stipulation. So if you have this, for example, we want to stimulate people to buy homes. It's because that will, some politicians, maybe by the dozens or hundreds, thought that was a good thing. Okay, so we're going to try to stimulate homes, to stimulate the economy. So we put a deduction for mortgage payments so that people would be more incented to buy a house because of mortgage interest deductions. Oh, come on, stop this. And that's just one example. It's an example that most people are familiar with, but there's hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of examples in the tax code Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Simplify the tax code. Taxes are taxes. If you want to have a program that stimulates housing, it's a spending program. You tax, you get the money, and then you specifically pass a spending program to stimulate housing, or to stimulate electric cars, or to stimulate or provide support for the grower or the producers of milk, or the growers of corn, or whatever it is. But you don't put it in the tax code. You don't put it in the tax code. The taxes should be extremely simple, extremely fair, and at least in my view, it's very likely that we could implement something on the order of a 20% total tax rate. Total tax rate. I said the word total, which would cover all federal, state, health care, and Social Security requirements. Something on that order of taxes. You never have to fill in another tax form, never have to worry about whether or not you're taking all your deductions. And you would do this on a corporate level and on an individual level, and things would become tremendously easier, tremendously better, because now, and by the way, this tax rate, we could also somehow roughly tie it to the budget. So if the budgets start to balloon, then the tax rate would start to balloon, and people would start being concerned because, hey, you just raised my tax rate from 28 to 32%. I don't like it. Let's talk about the budget. But right now, the way that everything is so confounded and so complex, there's no transparency across any of it, and so therefore it becomes this concept of the moral hazard again, where people, moral hazard again, just to reiterate the definition, you don't understand something, so you're insulated from understanding it, so you don't behave in an appropriate way because you are insulated from knowing the real impact. So, like I say here, the last thing, if it's desired, like we can stimulate housing, we can stimulate or provide farming support or whatever. And when we roll this out, if we do this tax reform, we can have a big package. The tax reform package would be quite simple. And then we can have a package of, okay, here are all the laws that we want to implement to kind of replicate the impact that we're getting in some of these tax deduction scenarios, but now they're in the open and clear and I'm not going to remember the word. Sorry. Anyway, let's move on. Next page. I'm sure that there's plenty of people that would be in this country would want to just know about me, particularly my personal religious beliefs. I was raised as a Roman Catholic, but only loosely so. My family stopped attending church for the most part, or at least when we were children. My mother and father stopped taking us. I was probably 8 years old, 7 or 8 years old. And I've not really attended church very much since then. And as it says here on the slide, I am a man of science, logic, and reason, but I do very much believe in God. And I also believe that, as it says here on the slide, that unfortunately, the God of fairness and beauty and love, there's been people, again, definition of success, warping the words of God as they're presented to people to, again, influence them in ways that would benefit, the leaders doing that horrific thing, I personally believe. So the word of, depending on where the word came from, it's been corrupted to suit um, the ideals or the desires, I guess that's not ideals, desires of certain people. And I think I see this, well, in fact, I know I see this on a regular basis. You talk to, and you look at certain churches, and some of the beliefs that they instill amongst their congregations. Well, I'm most familiar with the King James Bible. I've read it a couple of times, and these pastors and priests that there are certain things that they just say, well, this is what these passages in the Bible say. And I read those passages and I'm like, I'm sorry, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say anything remotely. You are reading into this all kinds of innuendo that does not exist in the words. They're very basic, simple words, and you are turning and twisting and spinning this into something that you're doing to try to control something, to try to influence people for the benefit of yourself or someone that you perceive needs to be benefited. These words do not say what you're saying, and unfortunately, that's often true. And I do not in any way. I'm not specifically talking about any individual church or pastor or priest or religion, but anyone that believes in God and attends church or is associated with churches or certain religions, um, I would encourage you to accept and believe in love and companionship and compassion, and the other rhetoric about it's great to kill other people, that there's a righteous thing to obliterate others in the name of God. I'm sorry, that just doesn't ring true, and it doesn't. It's a dichotomy that just is inappropriate. I think there's a popular song that says, believe in God, but um, leave the. Oh, I hate this when this happens. The dogma. That's it. Believe in God, but leave behind the dogma. I would encourage people to do that in every place and every religion around the world. As far as counterterrorism, we've already touched on this some. Hunger, poverty, and ignorance are the currencies of terrorism. We've got to address these things. We can on a global basis. We just have to decide that that's what we're going to do. That we're going to work with the various peoples around the world and help people come out of these places where their children and they themselves are hungry and impoverished and diseased and ignorant. And we've got to bring them out of that and bring them into a better place. And that will cause us to be able to put away a lot of the sword of warfare and pick up the shield of peace. And I think the United Nations is a great organization that through working through them in a very coordinated way, I think the world could make huge steps in this particular aspect. The next slide is about abortion. This is a very emotional issue. Obviously, it's a very important issue also. By far, the most difficult issue that we need to address in our society, and one of the big reasons is that it becomes emotional so very quickly. So I don't want to go into this. I can't possibly do it justice. in just a minute or two here in this presentation. But I do want to say that uh, we have to step back and 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 allow ourselves to have a conversation about abortion and birth control and the rights of the unborn and so on. We've got to allow ourselves to talk about what happens, what the reality is, and the pros and the cons of doing different things that we've been doing to this point. Oddly enough, so I'm the last of six kids. My next older brother and I we were both quote unquote mistakes, right? So my parents had four children. They had them in short order. I think they had like four children over 6 years or something, and then there was 3 years before my brother, and then there was another 3.5 years before I came along. Um, you know, I am grateful. I've had a great life. I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful that my parents did not decide that maybe I shouldn't be here. And I'm just saying that in truth and honesty. But having said that, the issue around abortion is extremely complex, and I think the other part of it is it is a very special thing. This uh, having the ability to bear children. This is a special thing that women, of course, have this capability, and men do not. And it's a serious gift, but it's also a potential curse and burden. There's a part of me that really believes that we need to um, talk to women about this a lot. So during my administration, if I should be elected, we're going to have a council of women, uh, a wide uh, cross section of women in this country, different economic and social and geographic backgrounds, and we're going to get them together and again talk about this kind of very special thing that quite frankly men are going to struggle with because we it's almost impossible for us to really understand it as completely as a woman. Um, which is not to say that we shouldn't have any input whatsoever, but I think this is an issue that bears uh, a special a special effort on the part of all of us, and especially women who are obviously most impacted by it. And the other thing about it is, regardless of how you believe about this, so there's another aspect. Let me hit upon this. I just thought of it, or rethought of it. The you know, as in our country, as we have children, it's amazing. Actually, the United States is, the health of our infants is not amongst the best in the world. It's down the list a lot further than anyone would expect, I think. And so I think maybe a part of this discussion is not just focused on abortion, but the whole gestation and birthing thing and health of babies and how we should approach this as a society to maximize the health of infants. Um, Minimize the detrimental things that might happen to them while they're being carried in their mother's wombs, and part of that would be the discussion about preventing conception, and then what happens during the gestation period, and then what should we do? What should society uh, say about or provide for like this 9 month period, and then what comes after? And maybe the 9 months, the typical gestation period, should be a separate thing from what might come after. Um, let's see here. There seems like there was something else I wanted to say, but it's not coming to me. So I'll go to the last slide. Um, so my last slide is to talk about the administration. So if by providence I should be elected, if you should elect me to be the president, there are certain things that we're going to focus on. Actually, one of the things that actually isn't on this slide, and I want to mention it, one of the things that we need to focus on as the United States, as a community of humanity here on this planet, what's the plan? Where are we going? What do we aspire to be? Not just for the first 100 days of an administration, but what do we want to be for the next 100 years or next 100,000 years? What is it that we want to do? What is it that we want to be? Uh, what what do we aspire? To what vision do we want to move toward? What are our goals? It's actually amazing to me that we don't have this, and so we have basically these two political parties. They're pretty much run by special interest groups. One group having mostly kind of this one ideal or one vision on what the future should be. Another one having another one, and they basically trying, well, effectively treating the rest of us as if we're puppets. That and the funny thing is, and please pay attention to this. The funny thing is that we elect representatives from one party, but not for long. you know, we have a tendency to, okay, we elect them for a while, then we replace them with the other party, then we replace them with the other party, then we replace them with the other party. And the reason is that on the whole, you and I, most of us, would like a kind of a centrist view. There's a path, there's a way that we want to go. And unfortunately, the way that our political system has been in the past, not only do we not have a clear definition of where it is that we want to go, but then we elect left-leaning or right-leaning people, and then we go off the course that we really want to be on, and we keep trying to steer back onto the course. So here's an analogy. Let's just imagine, right now in this country, we drive our cars on the right side. Okay, now that has nothing to do with being liberal or conservative, but it happens to be the right side of the road. Well, why is that? Well, because you got to decide. There has to be a way, right? You can't drive down the center. You crash into everybody. So you have to drive side by side, which means that at some point you make a decision, right or left. But just imagine if we treated our traffic laws like we treat our government. So, well, the left-hand drivers won this year, so the next 4 years we're going to drive on the left side. Oh, well, the right-hand drivers won this year, so for the next 4 years we're going to drive on the right-hand side. And can you imagine the chaos that would occur in our streets if we switched from left-hand driving to right-hand driving every 4 or 8 years or whatever? Well, we do this in our political system. Huh? This is exactly what we do with our government. And I think in a big part of it's because I don't know why, whether we've never thought of it before or no one wanted to try to tackle it, but there should be a vision, there should be a way forward. Government is not about winning, it's about sustaining and stability and providing protections and safeties for the people being governed. Again, freedom equality, fairness. And there should be some kind of aspiration, some kind of vision and desire for that. And regardless of where the candidates come from, or the various people that are elected or appointed to offices in our government, that mandate, that path forward should be there, and we should be judging them on how well they're helping us maintain the path toward what it is that we as a people desire and aspire to in the long term. And the very best example of government as it currently exists that I think proves this principle is the Federal Reserve. Now, this organization was created because we acknowledged as a people, as a government, that the economy needed to have a regulatory and stabilizing organization that was trying to mitigate the extremes. Oh, why is that? Well, because extremes are bad. We had the Great Depression, we had the Great Recession. This causes all tremendous stress and harm to many, many millions of individuals when they occur. And so the Fed, as we call it, the Federal Reserve organization, they have been observing our economy, and they stepwise and independent of political parties and opinions of individuals, they look at what is happening in our economy, and then step by step they use the tools that they have, interest rates of various forms, and loan capabilities, and so on, all the different monetary ways that they can influence how the economy is behaving, and it's an influence. So they're tweaking, they're changing things a little bit, because if the economy is getting where it's expanding too quickly, they know that's a bad thing, so they start tweaking things so it'll expand a little bit more slowly. And if it's starting to cool down, as they say, if it's starting to not expand enough, then they do a little bit to try to encourage expansion, because you don't want it to go the other way. You don't want it to dive off into recession. And they've done actually a fabulous job. And in fact, in 2008, wow, I mean, what a great tribute to how government can really be a positive influence on what happens to our society. They basically rode in on white horses. And yes, if it ever happens again, we can do it better. I'm not even suggesting that it was done perfectly in any way, shape, or form. But the way that they came up with packages of loans and corporate buyouts and all these other things that they did to stabilize what was a very, very unstable position. Of course, the other key thing, though, and the thing that they warn against is, we got in trouble with a lot of deregulation that removed a lot of the transparency that was going on in our investment systems and monetary systems. So we still have to be careful and have an ongoing regulatory environment so that we know that there's very good transparency of the kinds of transactions that are happening, and we understand the risk and the backing, the assets associated with all the things that we do. So back to the administration. Focus on a single issue once a month. So we'll talk about Second Amendment rights, for example, 1 month. And as I've talked about in the past, we'll talk about pro and con, good and bad, for and against. We'll have have a structure of what the truth is, and then Now, based on that, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, how do we balance freedom, equality, and fairness in regard to Second Amendment rights and gun ownership? And it's not just going to be that in that particular case, by the way. We have to look at things holistically. So I think that, it's not just a matter of gun ownership, but it's also, public service announcements and training in our schools about, um, we're basically trying to prevent these mass shootings from occurring, and this is a travesty and a horrific thing that is going on. And so, and then also understanding what's the psychology behind this, what is driving these people to do this, and understanding that, and then of course still as a government, as a community, not only just talking about gun regulation, but what do we do to affect the psychology of the people that might do these things. We have to understand this, and then we all of us have to be more aware of what's going on. And if there's a person down the street and we know them or suspect that they're pretty unstable based on the interactions that we had with them, and now we see that they're suddenly um, building up an arsenal of weapons and ammunition. Hey, we as people, we have to have our eyes open. Much like when you're in an airport and they constantly announce, hey, if you see something that's suspicious, you should tell us. Well, we need to do that in our society in general. We have to be good neighbors, and that's looking at people and saying, hey, this is suspicious activity. We ought to at least look into this. And then we have to have the infrastructure within our police forces and so on to be able to handle that kind of thing in a way that's reasoned and reasonable. And I talked about establishing the long-term goals for the federal government. Again, to get away from driving on the left, driving on the right, driving on the left. The next one talks about having a cabinet that reflects the social fabric of America. And so you look at that and people would say, oh, wait a second, you're talking about quotas. And shouldn't you just be focused on having the best people in these jobs? Well, again, pro and con, good and bad, for and against. So the reality in America, and it's still a reality, and I will give some support to the idea that it's better than it used to be. But the reality is that women in America, their experiences over their lifetimes are considerably different than men's experiences over their lifetimes. This is true. I see it every day, and I hear it from the people, both men and women. It's true. This is true of people of Asian heritage. This is true of people with African backgrounds, Hispanic and Latino backgrounds, and so on. It's absolutely true that these various people with these different ethnicities, it's a hard word for me to say, ethnicities, their experiences in this country are different. And a representative government needs to have input from those different experiences. And with 340 million people in this country, I'm sure that there's gracious plenty people that, half of them being women. There are great, outstanding, fantastic performing women for whatever roles in government. I'm sure it'll be not a problem to find plenty of women to fill those roles. Same thing for people with Asian background, same thing for people with African background, with Native American background, with Hispanic or Latino background, and so on. And so, yes, if I am elected, my cabinet and my staff will have a considerable uh, and it will reflect the social fabric of America, because we, the people of a representative government, need that representation. At some future time, at some future place, um, it may be true that women and men are treated exactly the same in this country, and people of Asian descent and African descent and Hispanic and Latino descent and so on are treated exactly the same. Their experiences on the whole, on the average, are the same in this country. And when that is true, it won't be necessary anymore for uh, the government of the people to have subsets of those people as the representation. Um, and I think that's about all I'm going to say about the administration at this point. Other than to say I will work hard to, especially if the campaign is gaining momentum. One of the things we're going to do is make sure that we're well set for um, taking positions in the government immediately upon my inauguration and the shift in government in January of 2021. So there won't be we'll have long since identified highly qualified candidates for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of positions before January of 2021. And also, I will say this at this point: I am offering to serve for 4 years, not any longer than that. So. Um, One of the things that we'll be doing during those 4 years is part of my staff will be looking for someone helping all of us as a community, as a group, as 340 million Americans, someone to replace me. Because if I am a good president, if I happen to be popular, um, and people want to reelect me, I will not do it. I will not run, and if elected, I will not serve. It's not happening. I'm going to do this for 4 years. I will, as Melville said, I will shoot my hot heart out upon it. I will give it everything that I have. But yeah, at the end of 4 years, it will be someone else's turn, and I think that is fair and appropriate in a representative government. So this concludes my presentation in almost 2 hours, the entire presentation. Again, hopefully if 2 hours was too long, you've taken the time to stop or fast forward into different areas of the presentation that were of greatest interest to you. But I would really strongly encourage anyone, everyone, to spend the time going through, listening to what I've had to say about the different issues, and seeking the whole truth, pro and con, good and bad, for and against, and thinking through what would be your reasoned and reasonable approach to solutions for the issues that we faced, based on the whole amalgam of the truth for these issues. Again, Michael James Ott. You can find my information at ottin2020.org, or I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Just look for ottin2020. I look forward to serving you. And again, I ask, will you take my hand, and will you walk with me side by side to a better and brighter tomorrow?